Good morning, Year 6. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the causes of World War Two. This is quite a complex subject, and so I suggest you listen carefully and possibly even watch twice. But most people, when asked why the Second World War started, would say it was Hitler's fault. It was Hitler, he was evil, he started the Second World War. Now, saying that is largely true. He was evil and he did start the Second World War. However, it is a massive simplification of what happened. What we really need to look at in looking at the causes of the Second World War is the conditions that allowed someone like Hitler to come to power and do the kind of things he did. And to do that, we have to go back to the First World War. At the end of the First World War, Germany were beaten, and in order to end the war officially, they needed to sign a peace treaty, and that peace treaty was called the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so that was a treaty that took place in the city of Versailles in France, and it laid down the conditions under which the Allied powers, so that is France, the UK and the USA, would allow peace for Germany. Okay, so we'd stop fighting them if they met these conditions. Now, these conditions were extremely harsh. First of all, Germany had to take the blame for the war. Now, the First World War was very different from the Second World War. It is very difficult to say that all of the blame lies with Germany for the First World War, and yet at the end of it they were told that they must accept the blame in order for the war to end. Secondly, not only had they to accept the blame, but they had to actually pay the other countries money back. So war had been very expensive. Lots of things had been blown up and needed rebuilding as well, and it was thought that Germany should pay for this. So they had to pay back some of the other countries, France in particular, and these were called reparations. So I think that comes from the word repair, but basically they would pay money to repair the damage they did, and it was a huge amount of money. It was about £6.6 billion back at the time, okay, which would be worth a huge amount more these days. Now, Germany had just been defeated in war. The country was bankrupt, and there was absolutely no way they could really pay these reparations. Thirdly, Germany lost a lot of its territory. So parts of Germany were given to other countries. So often these were quite rich parts of Germany as well. So there was a part given to France, a part given to Denmark, some of it given to Poland. Now you imagine if you are some of the people either living in these areas or living quite close by, maybe you had family who lived in these areas, you are going to be quite upset if one day you are German and the next day you are suddenly French or Danish or Polish, or other members of your family are in that situation. So this was really hard to take for lots and lots of the German people. And finally, Germany's military was restricted. Okay, so in order to stop them from being able to fight another war, they weren't allowed to have an army of more than 100,000 people. And that army was allowed nowhere near France. They couldn't be stationed near France. So all of these measures were designed to make Germany weak and to make it incapable of causing another war. Obviously, we know, looking back, using hindsight, that this did not work at all. What it did was it humiliated Germany. It made them poor. It took away some of their land. And basically this caused huge problems in Germany. So it comes to the next point, and that's sort of economic based. Um, Even without paying these reparations, Germany was a bankrupt country. Okay, they had no money at all. Their economy was in tatters. What happened very quickly was something called hyperinflation. Okay, so hyperinflation is when money becomes almost valueless. So if you've got money, it suddenly becomes almost worthless. If people wanted to buy a loaf of bread in Germany during some parts, they would have to go to the shop with a wheelbarrow full of money just for a loaf of bread. And so if you had savings, they become virtually worthless. The only thing of value are the things you actually have. So that was a massive problem. There was also a massive problem with unemployment. This all led to things, being very difficult inside Germany. Now, after the First World War, Germany had to have a democratically elected government. But this elected government had no way of dealing with the problems that the country faced. And so what we had was election after election where there would be a new election every year, just about. A bit like what we've had recently here. And with those elections, what you'd get is you'd get a new government who again were incapable of dealing with the problems that the country faced. Now, when you get problems like this and no one can deal with them, what you often get is people more receptive to extreme answers. So what Hitler did was he came along and he offered very simple solutions to the problems Germany was having. He came in and he said, actually, Germany wasn't to blame for the First World War, and he had his own people to blame. He decided that it was the fault of the Jews that Germany had lost the First World War. This is based on very, very little evidence at all. There's no evidence for that, but that is what Hitler said. So he just blamed someone else for Germany losing. The reparations, so paying back the money, he just said, well, we're not going to do it. We'll stop paying them. We'll see what they do about that. The territory, Hitler said he would take back German territory. So all of those bits that were taken away in the Treaty of Versailles, he would take back. We know now that he also went much further than that and took territory that had never previously belonged to Germany. And he built up the military. Now, at this point, Germany was a very, very weak country, and they could have been stopped easily. So the UK, France, the USA, if they had have chosen to, when Hitler came to power, when he got democratically elected in Germany in 1933, they could have made him stop. But this would have involved going back to war. And the people of Europe did not want to go back to war. They had also had a hard time economically and they couldn't afford it. But more than anything, the First World War had been described to the people as the war to end all wars, and that there would never ever be anything like that again. And so the thought of war with Germany so soon after the First World War was actually quite unthinkable for most of them. So what we had the start of a policy of appeasement. Now, appeasement basically means that they let Hitler do what he was going to do. They just talked to him. They hoped that he would reverse the Treaty of Versailles and then sort of be happy with his lot. That's what they were hoping. And above all things, they just wanted to avoid going to war with Germany. Okay, so we have appeasement as a big thing. Now, the reason why this is a cause of the Second World War, in spite of the fact that what they're trying to do is they're trying to not go to war, is because if in 1933 or 1934 they had have stopped Hitler, it wouldn't have been a hard thing to do. But Hitler built up the country. Having stopped paying the reparations, Germany became richer, and he built up things like the military. He built lots of equipment for the military as well, and he basically prepared Germany for war. And so in those years between 1933 and 1939, he made Germany much more ready for war, and that meant that the war was going to go on for much, much longer. Okay, so the policy of appeasement starts there. It continues because when Germany went beyond the Treaty of Versailles here, they continued to appease them. So in 1938, Germany marched its troops into Austria in what was known as the Anschluss. Okay, Austria were all right with this at the time. They didn't fight back. They just let Germany march their troops in, and Austria became unified with Germany. This was also something the Treaty of Versailles said could not happen. Then, soon after that, Germany invaded Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia, the vast majority of it had never ever been part of Germany, but he invaded the whole thing. Czechoslovakia did try and fight back, and they asked for the help. They asked for help from France, they asked for help from the UK. They wanted to stop Hitler at this point. Neville Chamberlain, who was the British Prime Minister, went to visit Hitler. He spoke to Hitler, and Hitler promised that if Chamberlain let him take Czechoslovakia, that would be an end to it. There would be no more invasions of other countries. And Neville Chamberlain came back to the UK and he declared that we have peace in our time. Okay, the problem was Hitler lied. He had no intention of stopping there. In fact, what he thought was, if Chamberlain won't go to war with me even when I invade Czechoslovakia, he's not going to go to war with me. So the next thing he did was invade Poland. Now, Neville Chamberlain felt at this point he had no option but to fight back. And so he declared war on Germany, and the Second World War started. To be clear, that is, the Second World War started in Europe. Already at this point, war had begun in parts of Asia. So what we had was a spread of war across the globe. And as some of the allies of a different country in Europe got involved, the war spread even further. And so we get what is called a world war again, where the war is being fought all around the world for sometimes different reasons, sometimes the same war, but basically the whole world was at war. So that was the 1st of September that Hitler invaded Poland. I think it's the 3rd of September that the Second World War was officially started. But as you can hear from that, it's far more complicated than you would imagine for the reasons for the start of the war. The fact that Hitler was allowed to come to power in Germany and then to build up the army in Germany and get to a point where Germany were in effect ready for war is the fault of many, many people.